Zelena, did Slippery Rock have an application fee? See, they were free when I applied.
They're not on the Common App, which makes me really mad.
We're above the Common App. And don't have Dr. Phil as your recommender because they'll probably not accept you. No, you don't know about the Dr. Phil controversy?
No. Dr. Phil's
Shame
son
on
opens
you.
up for the Jonas Brothers. What? Dr. Phil's
When-
son opens up for the Jonas Brothers.
When the whole FBI Varsity Blues investigation with Aunt Becky and Felicity Huffman and all that stuff was going on, Dr. Phil was on an interview being like, the reason to do this is all about like status and whatnot because people don't want to say like my son or daughter went to Slippery Rock. They would rather say went to Stanford or Princeton. At which point social media blew up and Slippery Rock's going, Phil, what are you doing here? It's like, I thought it was a fictitious place. I didn't realize it was a real school. All you people are wonderful and all like that. Because like Michigan, Texas would do it. I think Notre Dame would announce the football scores. And people all thought they were like, yeah, that's the place. We're real, Jonah. We're real. Rock 88. Anyone hear in the news yesterday? The headline about Trump administration yesterday and health.
The vaping thing?
The vaping thing. So they're, and it's not like, hey, starting tomorrow, but yeah, flavored pods, whatever we want to end up, they're looking to ban. And again, this isn't me trying to push that, hey, this would be something to talk about. But, one of the things that we were kind of mentioning, well, obviously yesterday or on Tuesday, Jules got mentioned, vaping in general somewhere on here, throughout the idea about, hey, does the government have the right to govern personal well-being and things like that? And again, that could be smoking, it could be alcohol, and all those kinds of things. Those would be, that would be a concept that we could look at if you wanted to, but we'll just make sure you put headphones in your phone. It's still for purchase though, correct?
Yeah, you can still buy it, but to buy the actual thing, you have to be 21
Well, but I mean, like in comparison to like say alcohol, like if you are caught drinking alcohol as a 17, 18, 19-year-old, that's like citation illegal, or if you're heaven forbid driving with it or something like that. If you're seen vaping in public, there's no ramification.
But if you get ID buying
Right.
then you can trouble. But
Right.
if we're seen, they can't do it.
So
Real
it's
legal age.
because it's the same thing like tobacco,
Yeah.
where we age for tobacco is to purchase, it's not to use. Now school grounds in certain places, obviously that's a whole kind of ballgame. So is I don't know, just throw it out there. Is the idea, and I think getting vaping, like going to vaping in such a specific manner, might be a little too limiting. Do you like the idea of exploring about does government have the right to govern personal well-being? Is that something that you want to look at, or Josh is going, yeah, I don't want anything to do with that.
Well, I feel like it's a very controversial topic. Because there's so many
They said,
different
"Take that,
things,
Josh."
like,
I just
like
think
so
that,
many
they
different
never banned
types of
cigarettes, and I think cigarettes and vapes are very comparable.
I wonder if that will happen in my lifetime.
What, they banned cigarettes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just
The-
feel like it's the same thing.
The reason it won't happen now, I would say, is because it's so much of it would be a financial hardship for a lot of places. But that amount of usage has drastically gone down. So I do wonder if that's something that eventually does occur.
Well, I feel like if vapes stayed around, people would see the long-term effects of vapes, and then they would go down too in the future. It just
Although, I could do a counter argument against myself though, and this happens in argument. I just said that, Josh says kind of like cigarettes, and always talks about banning, and I said I could see them banning that in my lifetime. However, what this kind of reminds me of from a historical sense, you know, because there's this outbreak of lung illness, sickness, and I think it's what, 6 deaths now or have been reportedly directly to vaping, let alone other I had a word, it just completely went away, but like conditions, you know, with lungs that aren't doing well. In 1920s, you had outbreaks of people dying from alcohol poisoning, because it was prohibition. So you had bootlegging, you had people producing their own stuff, and so it wasn't out, like, this sounds terrible, but it wasn't uncommon for like wood varnish to end up being in a batch of whiskey or whatnot, because you were trying to spread out the alcohol as much as you had it so that you could produce more and sell more and things like that. So as you know, as things take place that cause death, and obviously there's a direct link with smoking and lung cancer, you know, not that they would go, hey, smoke cigarettes instead. They might keep something that could be a vice, that could not be good for your health, but if it's not causing people to directly die as immediately as the vaping would be, I could see them, you know, legalizing it. Years ago, Pitt used to have a wonderful debate series that they would have open to the public. So as for CH's argumentation, we took field trips and we went to a couple of the debates. We did one on concussions with football. The resolution was contact football should be banned prior to 9th grade. So high school football would be okay, but the youth football games that my daughter cheers at would not be full contact football. It would have to be flag football or something like that. They had the, and you know, CDT was certainly in the, or not CDT. You can tell what time it is in English, kind of taking CDTs. CTE was certainly big in the news at that point with death of football players. They had what's known as the brain doctor or the brain collector. Chris Nowinski is the guy who will ask families after a former football player dies, can I have a brain so that we can do the study for it? And he's collected like over 100 of them at this point. He was arguing that it should be banned. And he was going up against neurosurgeon for the Steelers. He was saying, no, it should not be banned. Football's as safe as it's ever been, and it's equally as safe as like other sports. And so they were kind of going at it. It was an interesting debate. It was the same time that like the concussion movie was coming out, so it all kind of worked together. But they did one before where doing the sugar tax for sodas, Pepsi and Coke. And so you had debate going on. One of them, the one person was I think she was a New York State House rep that was pushing for the soda tax. I forget who the other side was. Guess what the argument ended up boiling down to for the side that was against the sugar tax? And you could argue this was a slippery slope. But he was going, if you have a sugar tax that is going to make it more expensive to purchase Mountain Dew, Pepsi, Red Bull, this is what's going to happen. Well, he's against it though. And yes, he did admit less people will buy those beverages. This is being held at Pitt, primarily a college campus, student body in attendance. People will buy alcohol. You'll have more underage drinking taking place if a student can't buy a Pepsi or a Mountain Dew. And at that point, the whole tide of the audience went over to his side, because before they were pretty much going, yeah, I think we're in favor of the sugar tax. But he went, people will purchase alcohol if they can't purchase their drinks. Dependent upon the tax and all that kind of stuff. Or it was like, if it's equal, then they're going to go that route. At which point, that side won. It was Pitt students who were debating, that's what it was. It was students from the Pitt debate team. So they won the crowd over. The rep from New York had signed off an agreement that this debate could be videotaped, and publicly broadcasted for folks to see. Once she lost the debate, they've gotten into legal action where they sued that no, you can't show this video because it was bad for her. The college team had just defeated her in talking about alcohol and all those kinds of things. So there are maybe where we would think something could be taken away that it might kind of keep something around so that it doesn't go too far in the other direction.
likely by banning what they ban, e-cigarettes or whatever, they're actually making them more dangerous and probably more going to get nicotine poisoning and stuff like that.
And part of that could be is if it's banned, then you go to homemade substances, which that's certainly where you could have dangers, and is for I don't know, what do you think would be the I'm literally asking, I don't have an answer. What age group do you think would be the most dominant user? Like would it be high school for yours?
Anywhere from.
Yeah, but you want specific age, what did you say?
Anywhere from like
16 to 18?
to like.
Yeah,
I'd say 14 to 19.
Yeah, sometimes I think
Is a 15, 16-year-old going to be more susceptible or more curious if that ban is there than if it's not? And that's a rhetorical question. I think a lot of folks say yes. And so that might be a way too in which there's does it ultimately get banned or not?
I feel like that's the same like in foreign countries they have a lower alcohol age and they don't have nearly as many restrictions. So maybe if it wasn't restricted, that would
Because it's and well in I only know this because brother and nephew used to live in Wisconsin. This never applied to him, but in Wisconsin, which has a lot of breweries, so far as alcohol and things like that, drinking age is the same. It's still 21. All states have now gone to 21. I think West Virginia was the last one in the late 80s to switch. I know in Wisconsin though, if I'm the parent and I order a beer, I could give it to my child.
that's the same thing in Ohio too.
And the argument is, would you rather have the kid drinking in a basement party, when parents aren't around, or with the parent before a Packer game? And in some ways, that's a complex question because you could say, well, there's not one. Neither necessarily may not be good depending upon viewpoints and things like that. But I think that's kind of more of a European view towards things. I think a big difference between the U.S. and a lot of European countries is the reliance that we have on automobiles. I think drinking in the United States is more dangerous because of how often people will then get behind the wheel, where you have more, and not that people don't drive in Europe, but it is more of a public transportation, walking culture as opposed to, hey, let's drive off to the South Hills now, and things like that. In Europe. Well, especially if there's adult, back then.
You're allowed to drink before to the transportation, and then when you're 16, you're set.
Mhm.
But the difference is if they're legal driving age, is you have to be 18,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to learn to drive on the station, and you have to pay like thousands of dollars to get your driver's license. Because like my cousins live there, so he can like drive here, but he like has to go through all of these classes and gallons and just to get his license.
And I mean, it's been probably 21 years since I was in Europe, but it cost like 5 cents to take the bus.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like whenever I went there last year or a couple months ago, like I don't think I think I got into a car maybe 2 times, like because of the train.
Mm-hmm. And it's literally a well-oiled machine so far as if you're here and you need to get there, you can get there in like 5, 10 minutes.
Well, and then like with the whole thing with them banning it, it's I mean like even with the prohibition, it was a lot of it was driven by money because of the profit that the government's making. I mean if you ban it, that's millions and millions of dollars you're not making, and that people they're not going to claim it, they're not going to do taxes on it. It's all under the table, and that's how it was with alcohol. There's no tax on it, so people are making profit and not reporting that money to the government. So they're missing out on thousands of tax dollars. So why are they going to ban something? I mean, yeah, there's the health problems, but I mean, cigarettes are killing people, but they're making millions and millions of dollars on them, and they tax them higher to try and prevent people. So that's still not preventing them, and they're still making money.
I mean, and that tends to end up being a true statement, probably more often than not. Money, health, whatever you want, fill in the blank, money's going to supersede. Other topics, potential topics. Don't worry, Josh, we're not saying that we're doing this one. Quick little recap of things that we were kind of mentioning on Tuesday. We said stuff about, like, I think Adele, you were mentioning environmental issues here before we were leaving. Teenage stress, anxiety, school time, gender identity rights, music, entertainment, social media.
So we attack the gender identity rights. You say so much. Well, like acknowledge. I think it's a good topic, but I just bless you.
Bless you.
It's I feel like it's a great topic to argue about. Yeah.
One thing that I probably should mention is, so we're going to end up, picking like 4 topics and whatnot. If we, and this would go for any of it, not, just gender rights and where some folks are identity, some, yes, I'd like to talk about this, some going no. Once we debate a topic, that topic's like done for the year, okay? So if we were to do something on like, and certainly you can kind of change wording so it ends up being different, but say we were solely vaping should be banned, okay, is a resolution we end up doing. Jonah, when we get to student Congress, is not going to propose a bill that vaping should be banned, because we've already had this topic. So, if, and this would go for any of them, if gender identity is something that you think would be a good topic to explore, but because of the controversial nature that certainly can surround it, I don't know if that's going to work well for a large group, but that's something that you want to look at. You'll certainly have an ability to probably investigate that topic later. But if we were to do any topic now, that issue, when Josh goes, hey, can I debate this? We already did that, would be one thing that would come up. So I should say that about all of them, before we end up focusing. Now, if we go personal well-being, the government should govern personal well-being, and you want to ban cigarettes later, I would say that's different enough, because you're getting into a specific issue as opposed to a general concept from before, or sugar tax or whatever the case may be.
The spark rate's gonna work the same way it did last time, like you pulled 2 names and then.
Yeah. So the difference is, what the potential topics are, so you're better prepared for them. But you're still going in, not going which one you're going to take and which side. And so this is why the debatability of it is very important for you personally, because you don't want to be someone going, you know what, I think gender identity would be a great one, because I got a lot of support for this particular side. You might end up arguing the other side, which is not a bad thing. I think it's good to, in a lot of ways, argue the opposite of what you believe, because you can better prepare for counter arguments. But, just like how we kind of said with Pullman model, you got to be able to look at evidence and see how that can lead to a claim. You can't be so focused that this is the only claim and then therefore ignore other, when I say evidence, data, support, things like it for you. So just kind of do that. Your hand moved or something?
Oh, no, I just.
We had entertainment, I think, up at the top.
Oh, like we didn't pick one.
We haven't picked anything. But we said about social media. Adele, I think, was skip. We were throwing out like wording for some of these things, like positive impacts for face-to-face communication leads to decline in moral values, things like that. These were potential things that we were saying, but we haven't decided on any of them. Generally, like over the years, I would say something with social media tends to work well, because you folks use it, because I use it, and me. No, I have Remind.
I got your lunch yesterday.
See? Look at that. We bonded yesterday, even though we didn't have face-to-face communication.
That's crazy.
And Adele texted me when I was driving. I parked when I responded. You got me like just as I was starting to pull into Soldiers and Sailors, so things were okay. No, I don't use all that much at all. Like, no, I don't do Instagram, Snapchat. I have Facebook that I have like probably not looked at in the last 6 months.
Same. My cycle part of the family college is like.
I don't tweet. I get upset when I'm watching like a Penguin game and like there's little tweets at the bottom of the page.
Oh,
Because I really don't care what other people think.
Why do they even do that?
Did you see what I did?
And they're just putting people in
So, I just said to Sophia, I don't like watching Penguin games when they have the tweet the booth thing. Literally because I don't care, like what Zelena has to say about, well, for Penguin games, there's one day, I don't remember if it was Tuesdays or Wednesdays, but they do the tweet the booth. So what happens is you send tweets, the announcers that are calling the game will like read tweets. So Sidney Crosby scores, and so, you know, hashtag Morgan's Bay, blah, 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 Penguin fan, you know, goes, what a goal by Crosby. No kidding, I already saw it. I don't need your, like, so, and honestly, like a Mr. Kane resolution would be social media causes people to think their opinion really matters.
That's what good.
And I would be 100% ready to argue against that at any time because your opinion does not matter.
Oh my god, can I get one on video to send to someone?
I feel like that needs to be like a Bible video.
Your opinion.
Well, and it's not that your opinion doesn't matter, but I you know, because opinions, like, hey, it's an argumentation class, you know, you have to have opinions and arguments and things like that. But I do feel that, like, social media has kind of created the, I'll say, monster, so to speak, where, you know, I feel the need to show you what I'm eating for lunch. At which point Josh goes, what the heck is this?
I did do that.
Yeah, I told my son, like,
Because I said the purpose of me going to quit was to eat a good lunch. So you got to see the lunch that I was talking about.
It was like, I just thought you were like texting us. I don't know.
Someone did send me back a picture of their nachos in the cafeteria. With the I thought that was good. Does it? Listen up, and Lucas, I see your hand. You could argue, like, for example, so like saying that, you know, it's making a world where people think their opinion automatically matters. As to look at the pair of shoes that I think I'm going to buy, or this is my homecoming dress. You know, yay! I need you to clap at me to show that you love me. That you could simply argue that negatively impacts face-to-face communication because it limits discussion. You know, you're just studying stuff. You could argue, though, that positively impacts face-to-face communication because, no lie, in the hallway this morning before homeroom, I had 3 different people talk to me about my lunch. That chocolate cake looked really good.
really good.
Can I see a
Yeah.
picture of this?
So, in a way, you could argue, by me sending a picture, what did it do? It didn't spark debate or anything, but it sparked conversation. Is conversation important between student and teacher? Yeah, I would say so. Is Josh more likely to ask me a question because of a little, you know, remind interaction that we've had? Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But those are ways in which you could look at that, hey, it's a way to keep people connected. A downside, and, you know, as a lot of you are certainly getting into the workforce, what have phones basically done for people who work?
It's made everything so much easier. There's all these.
You're on a 24-hour shift. The expectation when Paige, you know, sends me a reminder tonight at 7:30 asking about her third body paragraph is that he'll respond. I won't, because I'm going to be at open house for middle school. What could be more fun than that? But it has certainly shifted and changed the dynamic that if you don't respond within 5 minutes, why haven't you responded? And that can go for work, that can go for relationships. I'm certain that goes for you and parents. You know, they send the respond within 30 seconds, you know, kind of thing. So that's a way in which you could start off with an issue like social media and be able to do, yeah, this is how it's corrupted, but this might be how it's enhanced. Social media has caused less trust between parents. You know, technology causes less trust between parents and children. You could, in theory, argue. Because I know when Abby's driving, I'll know how fast she's going and where with a little GPS feature on the car that goes right to my phone.
Really?
Are you gonna do the thing where like you set the car to like it can't go faster than like a limit?
No offense.
Yeah, cars like you can adjust to where you can't go faster than like this.
And then Lucas come together, because I remember you did have hand up.
Like social media is like desensitizing us because like there's so we see every type of tragedy. So like, are we just used to it, or is it like? Because I feel like so many bad things are like thrown at us? Is it desensitizing?
And I think this would end up being too specific, but you certainly could find a link between those two. You know,
Yes.
every night after Addie goes to bed, and like when I walk downstairs to go, actually have a little bit of time to me, because I'm important. By her door, she has her phone. Because she knows she can't have it in her room, at night. So the last thing she does is she just leaves it there outside her door. I pick it up, I take it downstairs, and I drop it off at, where she kind of eats breakfast. We're going to be running with that as long as I can. Because, after a certain time, because she'll put it there like at 8:30, she'll still read and do some things in her room, but after that, phone's done. And we're running with that certainly as long as we potentially can. Lucas, I know you had a question or topic from before.
As a natural evolution of everybody thinking their opinion is automatically extremely valuable, like a lot of people have started to believe that they're automatically professionals in almost every subject. Like and their opinions are the same way as doctorates and whatever degree.
Mm-hmm.
And that also kind of starts where people there's this thing called raw water that's basically it's literally dirty water that has bacteria in it. And people are selling it saying it's more healthy, and people are think they're professionals because social media just it's basically snake oil.
I told Mrs. Kane yesterday, I need to call the doctor. I need to make a physical. I'm almost 40. I don't know the last time I went to a doctor. I bet I was 24.
When you went to the doctor last?
Yeah, I honestly could not tell you the last time I had just a general exam, physical thing. And I think part of it is because if something's wrong, I can go to WebMD.
Yeah.
So no, I think access to information has done a lot of good things for us, but there's certainly a domino effect that has kind of gone the other way.
And that's partly why there's all these flat earthers and anti-vaxxers now.
Mm-hmm.
Flat earth.
Adele, did you have something? Here's what's going to happen tomorrow when you come in. You're going to grab laptops or juniors. You can have your iPads. If I certainly didn't have you write it down tomorrow. Whatever laptop you grab tomorrow, we're going to write down that being your assigned laptop. If you remember which number you had yesterday when you were doing the Google Classroom assignment, grab that one because it'll be an easier login. It'll be pretty immediate. We're going to do your quiz through Google Classroom. Through Google Classroom, Josh, on Google Forms. This guy was writing answers on the PDF that was attached. He wasn't watching me drain all those free throws at the top of the.
Was it turned in? Did I get credit for it?
Now you have credit for it.
Yeah.
But you'll do the quiz on Google Classroom, and then as a separate assignment, I'll have a poll or I'll have some resolutions because I think that's probably going to be the best way for us. Otherwise, we'll be here for 2 weeks and we won't have a resolution. Well, I'll throw up some resolutions that we'll vote for, and we'll probably end up going with those as our SPAR topics. We're going to take a look at Noodle tools tomorrow, then post-quiz. That's why I want you to grab laptops or iPads, because we're going to be going on there to make sure we can set up your accounts. And I'll talk to you about our source requirement. Timeline of events, where I see this going, would be most of next week. Some, maybe not all of Monday, but most of next week. Once we have the resolutions, Morgan knows what the topics are. She's going to be able to research them. And then the following Monday, which would be, I think, September the 23rd, is when we would actually start. So the debate.
So not next week.
So it's not going to, no, you're not debating next week. You're debating information. And then
Oh, sorry.
debate about.
People choose other people's pencils.
That's a pretty specific one.
She decided to gnaw on my pencil.
Boundaries of ownership.
Yeah.
Mr.
I
King,
wanna
you know about that
tell
Twitter
it-
thing? They do that on the pirate game with
Yeah.
Instagram. I just don't care. I just want to see the pirates lose.
But then no one wants pirates anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think definitely, sports and social media naturally kind of go in. Yeah, I really don't care. I'm waiting for the day when you can tweet hurdle as to whether or not you should steal, bunt, do a hit and run, and all that kind of stuff.
For I missed the meeting for the
She, I don't know if all of her classes are there, but she's usually downstairs, B hallway, I think it's 133. It would be like, if I'm going on this back wall, Mr. Clark, usually then Mrs. Robleski, she would be like the third door, I think, on the right.
Okay, 135,
I think it's 33.
33?
There would be Penn State stuff in the room.
Okay.
I did submit my thing from last night. As it turns out, I just didn't submit button.
Okay.
I was like, oh crap, I'm missing something.
Alright, I'll take a look at it.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too.